Now, as you may know, not long ago the actor Simon Pegg, who of course plays Chekhov in the new Star Trek movies, as well as Unkar Plutt in The Force Awakens, made some comments about how The Last Jedi perhaps took the character of Rey, or more in particular her lineage, in a direction that JJ Abrams, director of The Force Awakens, hadn't originally intended. And, as I've said many times before, and has been echoed by many of you in the comments, perhaps the biggest issue with the sequel trilogy thus far has been a lack of a shared vision between the different writers and directors, and the main thing this comment by Simon Pegg did was highlight that issue. But another thing it did is raise the question, or perhaps give credence to it, of the possibility that, in a sense, JJ Abrams could retcon the Rey parents' reveal from The Last Jedi about them being drunken nobodies, and give her the lineage he may have originally intended. The question then becomes, should this be something he even considers doing? Should he, within the context of the story of course, change them from being random drunks to something else, something more in line with the story that has come before it? Or is Rey a better character for essentially being nobody? Well, obviously, a lot depends on just how Abrams wants this story to play out and then end. Somehow having Rey end up being Luke's daughter, for example, is going to end any chance of a romantic version of Reylo, or Rey and Kylo Ren ending up together, from happening. Though it does leave open the door for two cousins finding a way to balance the Force together. Or having Rey be the grandchild of Obi-Wan Kenobi, for example, still leaves that door open for a romantic Reylo, not to mention could still make every word Kylo Ren said to her about her parents 100% true. They may have been drunken nobodies, but her grandfather may have been Obi-Wan, who just never knew he had a child somehow. Which would also open a door to the Obi-Wan Kenobi anthology movie that most fans have been asking for. Nevertheless, despite interesting possibilities if they do decide to retcon the reveal, the question still remains of should Abrams do this, especially when this has more or less been done before in the franchise, when Obi-Wan tells Luke in A New Hope that Vader betrayed him and murdered his father, only to learn in Empire Strikes Back that Vader was his father. Ironically enough, it all depends on your point of view, I suppose, which is the excuse Obi-Wan basically gave to Luke for initially lying to him about his father. But even though it's a character lying to another character within the context of the movie, it still in some ways comes off as feeling like the movie lying to us, the audience. I mean, there's only so many times you can do something like this before we, the audience, will never trust anything a character says ever again. And sure, it worked beautifully, and I think all is forgiven and should be in the case of the reveal in The Empire Strikes Back, because first of all, it is one of the best and most powerful moments in the history of film. And second of all, when Lucas made the first Star Wars movie, or as we call it now, A New Hope, he wasn't worried about setting up a sequel or creating depth or a backstory for these characters, despite what many people believe. Instead, he was just trying to make one good sci-fi movie in an age where sci-fi had a very small niche following, and later, in the creation process for The Empire Strikes Back, he came up with the idea to make Vader Luke's father, despite what the first movie had set up. And if he hadn't, one can only imagine what Star Wars would be today, if anything really. Which then brings us to the question, what will be the best possible ending for the Star Wars saga, or the story of the Skywalkers? George Lucas back then, back before it was even thought of as the Skywalker saga, decided to make Luke Vader's son, and hence turned it into said saga. And he did it simply because he thought it would make for the best story. Rian Johnson then thought the best idea or course for the story to take in Episode 8 was to make Rey nobody, and if Simon Pegg is to be believed, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be, this may not be what Abrams had in mind or envisioned when he kicked off this trilogy in Episode 7. So should Abrams now go back to his original idea, making this trilogy feel even more disjointed than maybe it already does? Or instead run with the idea that Johnson left him with, even though he may not in any way, shape, or form share Johnson's visions for the story? And yes, I know Abrams has said many times he liked what Johnson did with The Last Jedi, that he wished he could have even directed it. But as I've said before, what else was Abrams going to say when asked about Episode 8? That he hated everything about it? And if he'd done that, do you think he'd be back in the director's chair for Episode 9 now? Personally now, I'm torn on this issue. Before The Last Jedi came out, I was a supporter of the idea of Rey possibly being nobody. Hell, one of the first videos I ever did even suggested this possibility and got, let's say, mixed reviews from viewers. But I said then, if they were going to do that, they needed to find a way to give her an intriguing explanation for her powers, and fit her into the story in a meaningful way. Whether or not they've done that is up for debate, of course, especially considering she is little more than a counterbalance to Kylo Ren, and downloaded his training from his mind, Matrix style, during the interrogation scene in The Force Awakens. And to be honest with you, the real reasons why I think this was all done, why episode 8 subverted all expectations and shifted the story away from apparently what JJ Abrams had started, was it was the easiest route for Rian Johnson to take with the story. It was easier to simply kill off Snoke and remove him from the story, rather than give him a backstory and try to fit him into the narrative going forward. It was easier to make Luke a dejected hermit who refused to be a Jedi, the one that we all expected him to be, and then risk him stealing the spotlight from the other main characters until his final act where, of course, it cost him his life. It was easier to say Rey was nobody, to explain her past with one simple line from Kylo Ren, rather than give her either a complex explanation that both ate up runtime and risked confusing the audience, or saying she was so-and-so's daughter, which would then lead to far more questions. Now, in defense of Rian Johnson here a little bit, JJ Abrams did leave him with a whole bunch of mysteries or puzzle pieces to try and figure out how to fit together into a coherent, relatively easy to understand story. And you do have to keep in mind that not everyone who goes to see a Star Wars movie is a huge fan that is going to be able to follow along with a story that leans heavily on all the lore or all the things established in the previous movies. So a part of me gets why Rian Johnson did what he did. It wasn't just the easy way out, it was also his best option to make a movie for everybody, not just the diehard fans. Nevertheless, an argument can be made that if you go to see part 8 of something, it's your responsibility to have a general understanding and comprehension of the previous 7 parts. If I pick up a book and start not reading from the beginning, but rather the middle, it's not the author's fault that I don't understand what's going on. And I know that might be a poor example, but I do think an argument can be made that making episode 8, or now episode 9, too accessible isn't entirely fair to those who are familiar with all that has come before it, and want a satisfying end to the whole story, not just what becomes of Rey and Kylo Ren. And with all that said, I turn it over to all of you and ask, what do you think Abrams should do now? Should episode 9 focus mainly on Kylo Ren and Rey, like episode 8 seemed to be setting up? Or should Rey's lineage perhaps be changed in some respect, turning what Kylo said to her either into a blatant lie about her parents, or a truth from a certain point of view, and though her parents were nobody, her grandfather was Obi-Wan Kenobi perhaps? Should Abrams trust the audience to follow a story that relies heavily on all that comes before it, to try to make a movie that concludes the overall story? Or, again, keep the focus on the 2 current main characters that we've already got? So tell me what you think in the comments below, and this weekend I'll continue the conversation by delving into some of those comments and highlighting them in my weekly Let's Talk Some Star Wars video. And yes, I realize I did miss last week's video, but yet again, I got stuck at work far more than I had planned or hoped to. However, this, in theory, shouldn't happen much anymore because I am reducing my hours at work in an effort to be able to do this more and do it more on a consistent basis. Like how I always post my story videos on Tuesdays, I would like to have set days for other types of videos. Anyway, again, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.